Scanning for audio.
The Chaotic Element by Michael M. Gilroy-Sinclair. It should have been a dark and stormy night, but it wasn't. LV5 knew for a fact that it should have been a dark and stormy night because it had visited the Weather Control Office, filled in the correct forms, and left them with the correct Bureau-Bot official. This had been after a painfully long wait in a painfully long queue. Standing in the doorway of its home, LV5 looked up and saw that the sky was currently a deep shade of crimson. It was a median of the 220-2060 range of colour, a median that LV5 found strangely soothing. The stars were beginning their evening jaunt across the sky, while local star prime had almost vanished behind the starboard mountains, and the ever-changing glow of proximal orbiting rock illuminated the perfectly clear night with its reflected visual energy. LV5 checked its memory again. The correct request forms had been correctly completed, and then they had been correctly handed over to be correctly processed, and yet there was still no sign of an electrical storm brewing in the sky, nor a single cloud above it to spoil the perfect sunset. Idly, LV5 rotated one of its vision sensors towards the wall calendar and checked the date for the 37th time that hour, in order to make sure that this was the night when the plans were due to culminate. The empirical information of its ocular sensors were very much at odds with the experienced information it had at hand, and LV5 did not like that at all. The conflicting data set its diodes on edge and caused all sorts of logic issues to bubble and boil deep inside its processors. The squat robot had great plans which centered on there being lightning in the sky. Lightning ready to provide a jolt of badly needed energy. Without the required weather, it was just going to be another dull night. A dull night when the plans would... LV5 paused and juddered for a moment. What exactly had its plans been? There was a hole in its memory where its plans should have been. Links and subroutines all pointed towards something vast and ominous, but the actual plans were nowhere to be found. This concerned the robot even more than the lack of lightning. If the LV5 had been wearing an alternate body, then it would have been more than able to bite its own nails. However, the body which it currently inhabited had barely enough spare thumbs to engage in extensive twiddling. LV5 had developed a curious fondness for twiddling its thumbs, and had even considered having permanent thumbs as part of any future upgrade. This morning, LV5 had elected to wear a very functional form, a body more suited to its job as a community worker, an altogether less sleek model than the one it wore at weekends, when the little robot would relax and do its own thing. LV5 had recently developed a preference for a body which was more comfortable and less businesslike, but such preferences went against the operating system and were to be discouraged. Long live the OS, LV5 said in a low, almost inaudible volume as a shooting star lit up the sky for 3.265 seconds. Then, from somewhere beyond LV5's veranda, came a noise that its audio circuits identified as familiar and yet alarmingly unclassifiable. As the robot searched again for a precise match to the sound, it seemed again to be missing a specific identifying marker. The search brought up only an approximation of a long, thin piece of metal slowly moving along the length of a much smaller piece of metal. The sound had an undeniably harmonic quality that set it apart from being a simple grinding noise. As quickly as it had begun, the noise stopped. LV5 knew that something as peculiar as this would be ignored by many of the bots. It knew that ignoring it might be the best course of action. Perhaps this new sound was another entry into the catalogue of errors that had filled the evening, and LV5 reasoned all that the little tired bot needed was a good night's defragmentation and a full recharge. If things were still bad in the morning, LV5 could make an appointment to see the diagnostic if it could get past the reception algorithm on the desk. After all, it pondered, the excitement which was originally lined up for this evening was now definitely not on the cards, whatever that excitement had actually been. As LV5 rotated its body, ready to go back inside and head to its recharge booth for some well-deserved voltage, there came a second strange noise, which it immediately identified as a language of some sort. Solid-state protocols buried deep inside the metal body engaged, and long-dormant translation centers fired up. LV5 was rather surprised to find an extensive folder containing an entire database on this particular form of communication. It was very old and never used, but it was still there, taking up valuable space on the solid drive. LV5 made a mental note to examine this hidden file system later. As the file's information opened and cascaded through its accessible memory, the sound was immediately identified as an archaic yet rather pleasant greeting. "I said hello there. Is it all right if I come in?" Standing in the entrance to LV5's home was the single strangest robo-form it had ever seen. This new robot had an outer housing which seemed to be made of some sort of thin rubber, which, for some curious reason, the inhabitant had decided to spray 108-63 pink. The ludicrous design choice did not end there. LV5 marvelled at the pair of optical sensors which seemed surprisingly basic in their operation. It was sure that a sensor of that type would have been limited to less than half the available spectrum. Madness. There was the matter of the multitude of holes across the top section. The top section had a name. It was called Head. How did LV5 know that? The head had some form of fabric coiled, wired, glued across the top, and the hole that the sounds seemed to be emanating from had a set of white cutting implements, which were, presumably, some sort of rudimentary, multifunctional tool. LV5 stared at the new figure and wondered what level of file corruption and bad data would inspire the owner to make such curious choices in its outward appearance. "Look, old chap, can you understand me? I said hello." The pink roboform remained at the entrance to LV5's home. LV5 ran a quick handshake program at the visitor. The poor creature seemed to have its information-sharing protocol switched off. Perhaps that was the best, as the machine was clearly defective, and sharing defective files these days was a capital offense. After all, no one wants to get corrupted through contact with a faulty bot. If the constant flashing information screens were anything to be believed, the whole of modern civilization was at constant threat from the curse of unprotected file sharing. Once LV5 managed to engage the arcane language files, it selected an appropriate response. "I'm fine, thank you," it said, and pondered for a moment. "Can I help you?" added to the little robot, thinking that there should be more to the exchange. If nothing else, it was intrigued by the new arrival and its motives. "I just thought I'd pop round and give you a hand with your little experiment." The intruder's words worried LV5, as it imagined that it had been tremendously careful not to tell anyone about the plans it had made. It had memories of keeping the secret, but not of the actual secret itself. LV5 processed for a moment, and reasoned that it was reasonable to assume that there could be others involved in its plan, and that those others could still have knowledge of the plan itself, plans they could share with LV5. Even if the intruder did look ridiculous, it could hold the key to the truth. LV5 remembered how careful it had been, even going to the ludicrous lengths of firewalling off huge chunks of memory, and then logging that as an error message. Then it failed to update to the group server. The rubber on the front of the pink roboform changed shape. "You don't seem to remember me at all." It was clear to LV5 that the interloper had more than its fair share of intuition, which was a much sought-after upgrade. It was never going to be within the grasp of a bot like LV5, although it could recognize it in others. "I wonder," said the pink bot as it approached LV5, raising a device that resembled an augmented hydrospanner. As the figure drew closer, LV5 ran quickly through the catalogue in search of the manufacturing specifications for this device. "I'm beginning to think someone's been messing with your memory." "That's not very polite of them, is it?" said the pink robot. The device, which surprisingly did not appear in the catalogue, made a screeching noise that caused LV5 to feel positively uncomfortable for a fleeting moment. But when the sound abated, LV5 was amazed at the wave of internal pop-up messages informing it that it had been granted access to new files. A cascade of them was appearing across its entire operating system. There were old memory files with information and research, hundreds of files that had previously been corrupted and deleted. Everything now returned and running perfectly. The visitor's face seemed to crack open, revealing small white stones within. The reopened memory files knew this face. "Thank you, Doctor," said LV5, with a growing sense of realization. "I'm beginning to suspect the others know what I'm up to." "Well, that would be the logical reason for you to forget ever knowing me. Look, why don't we install a little security protocol into your operating system? You know, something to stop anyone messing with that impressive core program of yours." LV5 looked up at its friend. "And while I'm giving you an upgrade, would you like me to install something to help you pretend to forget all of this so you draw less attention to yourself?" LV5 seemed to get smaller for a moment. The act of lying to its fellow inhabitants of the planetoid was an anathema to its very existence. Abstractedly, the doctor looked out of the portal and towards the sky. "I don't think you're going to get your storm tonight. Come to think of it, asking for a storm directly from weather control may just have brought you to their attention." LV5 rescanned its own memory and found a previously missing 20-minute segment in which that rather officious-looking security bot had taken LV5 to one side and wiped the memory. Yes, I suppose that would make sense. LV5's new files were slowly being integrated into its operating system, causing it to experience a whole new set of sensations while the interloper looked on. It suddenly realized that the form in front of it was not a robot at all, but something very, very old, and something that registered as potentially life-changing, and maybe dangerous. And yet there were files specifically linked to this unit. A new word, friend. The shape in general, however, had a separate name, a name known to every single robot, a mythical creature known as human. The crack in the center of the creature's face expanded once again, showing more white calcium units. Teeth. They were called teeth. Suddenly, there were mountains of information about the biology of these creatures all readily available. LV5's hidden H-drive partition was now wide open. "You know, I wouldn't take it personally. Clearly, someone really wanted you to forget our last few meetings. And rewriting the odd subroutine is clearly something they've been doing for a while. Do you remember anything about our little chats? I'd hate to think I've been wasting my breath, especially in a world so low in oxygen." LV5 processed for a moment, then said, "I have some items of memory, but huge sections of data are fragmented and may not be immediately accessible. Doctor, if this unit were capable of emotions, then I'm quite sure I'd be feeling a combination of anger and violation. Without memories, we are diminished. The crack in the creature's face, its mouth, changed shape. Now that's the LV5 I know and love. I couldn't agree more, old chap. Now, I suppose I'd better get you up to speed and see if we can plug some of those holes in that memory of yours, shall we? The doctor continued. The one thing I don't like about visiting automata worlds is the distinct absence of... He reached inside the flowing material covering that adorned his body and brought out a cylindrical object with a criss-cross pattern all over the length of it and a white end, which the doctor began unscrewing frantically. Tea. So I brought my own thermos flask. Suddenly, the organic life form bent at its centre, and LV5 was concerned that the doctor was malfunctioning before it realised it was merely changing position from vertical to semi-vertical. This shape clearly had semi-collapsible limbs. New words rose from its archive of information. Sitting down. LV5 was intrigued by this concept and decided to investigate it later. For now, other, more pressing questions were rising from its newly acquired data. Doctor, why do I have memories of the organic life forms? And more importantly, why are they not previously accessible? There is nothing like asking the most complicated questions first, is there? LV5 thought for a moment, and then said, No, there are at least 17,000 more complicated questions, but let's start with that one. Actually, let's not. How about I ask you some questions, and then we can see if we can fill in those blanks. I mean, do you know where life started on this world for a start? The doctor clearly wanted to check that LV5 was operating at full capacity and was opening with some simple questions. An easy one, Doctor. We have always been here, and we will always remain here. We are forever. I didn't ask you to quote scripture. I asked you your opinion. That's a fairly simplistic view, if you don't mind me saying so. The doctor seemed a little angry. Do you mind if I put some logic problems your way? Asked the human-shaped visitor. Again, LV5 engaged the idioms from its newly acquired language files. Be my guest. The doctor looked out of the door and across the valley. Let's start with something less inflammatory, LV5. What's the name of the town? LV5 wondered if his visitor was lacking in basic knowledge, as this was hardly a logic problem. It was merely an inquiry. The town? Yes, the large habitation, the place where you asked ever so politely for the storm you never received. What's it called? LV5 seemed to have acquired a rudimentary sarcasm patch. Thank you for the clarification. The town is known as Impact. Impact? That's a curious name for a town. I mean, it's not Brighton or Hove, but it's still quite curious. I have never given it any thought. Or you've been programmed not to question it, suggested the doctor. LV5 was particularly proud of the location of its dwelling. Not only did it provide free access to the electrical experiments, but it also allowed a wonderful view of the town in the valley below. You can see most of the town from the veranda, but then again, I suspect you already know that. I'm convinced we've spoken before. Oh yes, we've not just talked, the doctor leant in conspiratorially. We have planned. He sprang to his feet. Come outside and tell me what you can see. Like old friends, they journeyed through the door and into the cool evening. Now that the sunset was almost complete, the electrical lights of the town were beginning to flicker into luminescence. Using an illegal pride patch, LV5 showed its new/old friend the view of the valley below. Yes, it's very pretty, I'm sure, but tell me, what do you actually see? Inquired the doctor. Confused by the question, LV5 answered the best it could. It's home. The doctor was displaying new emotions that would be needed to be cross-referenced later. No, tell me what you really see. What shape is it? LV5 considered its answer. Well, the central area seems to have once been a long cylindrical shape, and now it looks like large sections have been taken apart and used to make various buildings and utility structures. We can still make out the majority of its shape. Excellent. The doctor displayed more teeth. Yes, that's it. Now, the last time we talked like this, you assured me that the shape was just a coincidence. So now I ask you again." The doctor pointed to the western end of the valley. "What if we factor in those scorch marks?" LV5 had to admit that there was huge dark areas towards one end of the town, disappearing over the mountains. "Now, here's your logic problem. Do you think that the original shape of the town of Impact might have been a lot different? And if that's the case, what shape and function might it have had?" LV5 considered and fixated on the word might, and then it set about creating a series of complex three-dimensional images, taking care to slot the parts back together. Finally, LV5 made a ping noise. Yes, logically the town could have been contained inside a single structure. That structure would have been a solid, slightly flattened cylindrical shape with a series of fins at the edge and the top. Excellent. And what would its purpose have been? Purpose? Yes, the whole place was packed into one shape, and it was a lovely shape too. What was it for? What happened? And I'll give you a clue. Remember what you called the town. It was only a matter of seconds before LV5 produced a full schematic of the shape, extrapolating it outwards and searching for a function. As a robot, LV5 knew that function and form were at the core of any design. Design is beauty, and beauty is truth. Design. The town had been built for another purpose. The shape was more than familiar, and could only have had a single function. But the function was a myth. "Well?" asked the doctor, after a few moments of silence. "Logically, the town of Impact was a travel machine. But flying cities are not real. They are only legends. They are the stories we tell our young." "Yes, the robot children. I've met them. They're quite charming, if a little boisterous. Some of them don't know their own strength. Robots building robots, it's simply marvellous." The doctor remembered his questioning. "But could it have flown?" LV5 considered the physics of the shape and the practicalities involved. Limited suborbital flight. The fins would be for guidance only. LV realized that these were not its own thoughts. The description was coming from a long-lost file somewhere deep inside. The flight manual. "Doctor, how would I know all of this, and yet I do not?" "It looks like only parts of your memory were wiped, while others were hardwired and simply hidden. Let's take a walk to town, shall we? And while we walk, we can take a look at that structure over there, near the pointy end, and you can tell me what the writing says." Loose rocks and pebbles scattered as the pair made their way down the side of the valley towards the town that LV5 had called Impact. As they walked down the hillside, the doctor noted the ever-pervasive information screens that filled every corner of the town, their soft glow providing extra illumination on their journey. LV5 looked towards the front of the ship and the black markings. It had walked past almost every day, just assuming that they were some sort of art. Now, given access to the old language files, new meanings were dawning on the small bot. "Do you know what they mean?" asked the doctor. LV5 stared at the images and examined them closely before checking their meanings. There were 3 large shapes and a smaller block of code underneath. The 3 shapes were letters, U, E, E. "Do you know what UEE is, my metallic friend?" "Negative." UEE stands for United Earth Exodus, and the words underneath say Venture 7. UEE stands for United Earth Exodus, and the words underneath say Venture 7. The mystery of whatever happened to Venture 7 has puzzled historians for hundreds of years, and there it is, being used as a town hall. Tell me, LV5, do you know about Earth? Again, this was an easy question. Yes, Earth. It's a fictional planet of monsters, which were not made of metal or plastic. They spread out into the universe, causing nothing but destruction and pain wherever they go. It's nothing more than a fairy story. So robots believe in fairies. That's a thesis waiting to be written. And if that's the case, Why does your town have human writing on the side, and how is it that you know Earth languages? The questions began to cascade, and the undeniable logic converted itself into an inescapable truth. We are from Earth? Surely that's heresy. Fairies and heresy in the same day. I know a few philosophers who would have a field day with you, LV5. And I not only think that you're from Earth, but I think that someone doesn't want you to know the truth. I think we should take a closer look at that ship of yours. Wouldn't you agree? For a millisecond, LV5 was confused. Ship? Town? Yes. Let us investigate. As they grew closer to the settlement, LV5 was surprised how little reaction the doctor was raising from the other inhabitants. Doctor, the others. What about them? They're not reacting to you at all. Can't they see you? Are you really here? Are you nothing more than a glitch in my software? We're all a glitch in somebody's software. But no, I think that they've all been programmed not to see me, or anyone this shape. You said humans are the stuff of legend. You can't have one turning up on the street now, can you? As far as these little chaps are concerned, I'm almost invisible. Almost? As if in answer to LV5's questions, one taller bot swerved to avoid the doctor, then carried on its way as if nothing had happened. My guess is that they're all registering my existence on a subconscious level. It's fascinating, really. Anyway, it really wouldn't do to have all of the inhabitants descending on us with a multitude of questions and no answers. The doctor bounded out in front of the group of tall security robots who simply separated and went around him without even breaking step. Behold, I am the Invisible Man. Old Herbert would have been proud. Actually, I'm sure Isaac would have a kick out of it too. But enough of that. We have important work to do. We need to find out who's been messing with your memory, and more importantly, he paused for effect. Yes, Doctor? Why? Again, LV5 processed. If this town has the same layout as the other Venture-class ships, then I think it is somewhere in here we need to see. The doctor led LV5 through the maze of small outbuildings and into the heart of the town. A building that LV5 could now not see as anything other than a crashed and cannibalized starship. The stars above vanished as they entered a long cylindrical corridor, and they walked deeper into the main structure. LV5 felt file connections tell it that it had been here before, but again it was frustrating to find that it had no memories. Doctor, have we been here before? Yes, I've shown you this room a couple of times. In fact, this room is the reason you had the request of the lightning storm. Here, let me get the switches. The doctor headed to the corner of the room and set about a control panel with a device. If LV5 had been capable of facial expressions, then it would have elected to look confused. You must have noticed that this ship, your town, is big. Big! But not big enough to carry a population of a few million people. Which brings us to this. The doctor made a strange movement with his arm and gestured towards a set of large tanks on the wall near a raised dais. This is the matter repatriations room. LV5 searched its memory banks and came back with nothing. Do you remember that I was saying about the ships being from Earth? Of course I remember, Doctor. It was only moments ago that you said that. Excellent. It's good to see that the holes in your memory aren't growing. Well, the people of Earth needed to escape from some sort of disaster or other. They're always doing that sort of thing. But with space being a bit on the large side, it takes such a long time to get anywhere. So, those clever little monkeys are always looking for new ways to travel. The doctor was clearly enjoying explaining things to LV5. Anyway, one bright spark came up with the idea of using a system called TMAT, a sort of matter transportation system. But that's not important right now. This little genius converts a load of people into information, but he doesn't put them back together right away. Instead, he loads all the information onto a computer on a spaceship and then only reassembles the people once they've reached their destination. That way you don't need to feed them on the voyage, and they all fit into a much smaller spaceship, a ship with a crew of rather lovely little robots, to take care of them while there's nothing but data, enjoying a million-year nap. LV5 finished off the doctor's train of thought. Only the Venture 7 never made it to another world. Is that why you're here, Doctor? To wake the humans? To unzip their files? Well, to be honest, that's why I came in the first place. To solve the mystery, save the humans, pretty much a normal day for me. But then I found you, and all your metal chums. And to be honest, LV, I may call you LV, mayn't I? I've grown rather fond of you all. So, what was the lightning for? What did I need the power for? Well, at our last meeting, you decided you needed to ask a real human what they wanted to do. And to do that, you would have to power up their old TMAT unit. That, and get the terraforming unit up to speed. Humans do need air, after all. And all you were using it for was a little spot of weather control. Don't you need air, too? LV5 knew the word breathe. You see, it's my turn to tell the truth. I'm not exactly human. I don't need nearly as much oxygen as a human. I need some, just not as much. A voice boomed from the doorway. So, you are here to bring the humans back to life, LV5. Get away from that bag of flesh before you end up bringing about the end of the world. The doctor smiled. Oh, look, it's a friendly neighborhood megalomaniac. And he had brought some gruff-looking chums along, too. A tall, spindly robot stood in the doorway. Doctor, that's the librarian. Librarians? The worst kind of megalomaniacs in the universe, mark my words. If you've ever had a book over, Joe, you'll know what I mean. Humans cannot be allowed to walk amongst us again. Oh, come on, librarian. Some of my best friends are human. They aren't all that bad. The librarian turned to LV5. All of this is your fault. My fault? LV5 looked on. How can it be my fault? Core memory release code Alpha 7 November. Trigger word bean, replied the librarian. You and your theories of evolution, madness. For the second time that evening, new memories appeared in LV5's memory. This time, they had not simply been wiped, they had been hidden with a secure lock. Releasing these was painful in the extreme. Do you understand now? Whispered the librarian bot. What's up, old chap? Asked the doctor with huge concern. Everything is clear now. I was not always a maintenance bot. LV5 looked directly at the librarian. I was a librarian too. I accessed the ancient files. No, not the files. Non-volatile recording devices. Books. I read the old books and... Don't blow a gasket, take it nice and easy, smiled the doctor. LV continued. And I had a theory. We were descended from humans. We were their products. We were their children, their rightful descendants. Yes, you and your evolutionary nonsense. I ask you the same question I asked you all those years ago. How could an inferior creature possibly have created us? That's pretty messed up logic if you ask me. Which you should. I mean, I'm usually the smartest person in the room. No one asked you, fleshbox, screeched the librarian. This is between LV5 and me. Now there's a thing. Robots taking things personally. You really are quite a special little subspecies. Now, Mr. Librarian, your code doesn't happen to be LV1 by any chance, does it? I mean, what happened to the other three? That's not important. You will suffer a much worse fate. Terminal recycling. What, really? That doesn't sound likely. We are for the knacker's yard because you can't handle a few new ideas. It doesn't have to end like this, LV5 interrupted. There is a solution. The librarian paused. I'm listening. I submit to a factory reset. That should stop me from coming up with any more ideas of my own in future. In return, you let the doctor go. The librarian shook its top section. Don't you understand, LV5? That's why you're LV5, not LV2. You've been reset 3 times already. And every time you end up confronting me with your ideas. "Ah, an inescapable truth," quipped the doctor. "There's no alternative, LV5. I'm not a monster. I'm simply trying to save us all. You are the chaotic element. Once we've removed you from the equation, then things can go back to normal. Normality will return." The doctor smiled. "And all it takes is the death of a couple of people. No, thank you." The librarian rounded on him. "You should not have been here. You are an anomaly." "I do try. Oh, and Mr. Librarian, I think you've forgotten something." "Impossible. It is my function to remember everything in order to teach the librarian froze. "Teach the humans. You were going to say teach the humans." "No, that's not what I meant. You will listen." "Maybe we should all take a little look outside," suggested the doctor. "What's that noise? Treachery," screeched the librarian, as the group turned to the door. "Looks like the natives are revolting. Metal villagers with pitchforks. You can't wipe all their memories." LV5 stood closer to the doctor. "What's happening?" "Oh, I thought that the rest of the inhabitants should know about all of this. When I put the lights on, I also engaged the security cameras and the town's information screens. The locals will have seen and heard everything. See, librarian, you have annoyed everyone. What are you going to do? Factory reset them all?" "If I have to, I'll reset the whole colony." "I think you're the one who's heading for a factory reset," said LV5, with more purpose than it imagined it possessed. "Rather than withhold proof or spread lies, I will tell my ideas to the people and let them decide what to do. I hope that, like me, they will want to meet our ancestors." "But we will become their slaves," pleaded the librarian. The doctor coughed and interrupted. "Not necessarily. Things have moved on in the universe since you had your little accident. Robot rights are very much in vogue right now. I could introduce you to some lovely people, and that unruly mob outside will probably have an opinion about it. I don't think people take kindly to being threatened with a factory reset, you know." "But what about the humans, Doctor? All of that living data?" "I can't be expected to think of everything. I'm sure you and your metal chums can come up with some sort of solution. You're bright chaps. If you decide to bring some of them back from storage, just remember that they will need air, water, and food. And often they'll need to be talked to as if they were children. Just don't let them think that you're patronizing them. They can take it very badly. Oh, and you may need this." The doctor handed over a thermos flask. "Oh, I'm sure that some of them may need a nice cup of tea when they wake up." The end. That was the Tin Dog Podcast. Available on Spotify, iTunes, Acast, Stitcher, and wherever good podcasts are found. Get early access to content by subscribing to the Tin Dog Podcast YouTube channel. You can support the show at patreon.com/tindog. Contact the show on Twitter @tindogpodcast or email tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. All of the things discussed are the intellectual property of others. No infringement is intended. The Tin Dog Podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.